Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and if you look behind me on my set, you'll see a lot of relics of the 80s and 90s, and most of the things back there are mine from when I was a kid, and I've got even more in my back room over there that I brought over from my mother's house a couple of years ago. And what I wanted to do in this video is talk about how I am enjoying those games today. There's a lot of different ways to play retro games, but I thought I would show you what I am doing and maybe solicit some feedback from all of you. Now, I'm down to pretty much two pieces of hardware for my retro video game habit. One is the MiSTer, which we've talked about in the past, but I'll give you an update as to how mine is configured now. And the other is the Steam Deck. And of course, we've done some videos recently that give you some additional options as well. But in this one, we're going to focus on what I am doing currently. And I've been playing more retro video games now than ever, so I think I found something that's really worked overall. So let's dive into this and see what it's all about. Now, I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that some of this stuff I paid for with my own funds, most of it actually, although some things did come in free of charge from manufacturers, and I'll point that out as we work our way through the review. So let's get into it now and see what I'm doing in the retro game world these days. So we're going to start things off here with the MiSTer. And this is something that I've covered extensively in the past, and I'll put a link to all those videos in the video description so you can learn more about how you can get started with one of these things. And what's so special about the MiSTer is that it runs off of an FPGA chip, which stands for Field Programmable Gate Array. And in the context of retro gaming and retro computing, you can very accurately recreate the logic of how these old systems work. So this is not quite emulation, it is more replication. There's a lot of debate in the community about what to call it, but that's what I like to call it, replication. And why it's replication, in my opinion, is that not only are you replicating the logic of these individual chips, but you're also replicating how those chips communicated with each other in a very hardware accurate way. So when you have a core that's developed by one of these talented folks to really understand how the original hardware worked, you get a very accurate representation of that game with very minimal lag and an experience that boots up extremely quickly. And one thing that is really special about the MiSTer, which is why I like it so much, is that you can plug it in to a CRT television. So upstairs, I've got an old JVC AV27430 television. This TV came from my father's house when he was renovating his house a couple of years ago. It's a late model CRT TV. It was built in April of 2003, and it has component video inputs. So they have cables you can get that go out from this analog port here in the back that plug right into your television, and you will get the most beautiful picture from your retro games you've ever seen. Even the Atari 2600 looks super sharp, so much better than my original console does. And you get practically no lag, and you're playing on a CRT without some kind of processed image getting sent to it. It's actually building a circuit inside of itself to deliver an analog signal to that television. What's also really cool is how fast you can jump between different systems. So let me take you on a little journey here. We're going to start off by playing Afterburner on the NES. Yes, that's a Sega game, but Tengen actually made a bunch of Sega ports for the original Nintendo very briefly before they got in trouble over the licensing issues there. And if we take a look here, we can see that the Nintendo version is running nicely on my CRT. I think I want to go for a slightly better port. I'm going to hit the F12 key and switch to the Sega Master System core, and we can boot up the Sega version of the game on their own console, which was actually a pretty good port for 8-bit. But it's not quite there yet for me, so why don't we move on to the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive, where we can play Afterburner 2, which was actually a really good port for that system. Now, the Sega Genesis version does have a lot of nostalgia for me just because I played a lot of it back in the day, but maybe we want to get into a more arcade-perfect port. And one of the options we have for that is the 32X version, because we can run Sega 32X games in FPGA on the MiSTer here, and there we've got Afterburner running there. It looks and plays great. It looks very much like the arcade, although it doesn't quite run at the arcade frame rate. So to bump it up a notch, we're going to add a little bit more complexity to the mix and load in the Sega Saturn core and boot up Afterburner on that, where we'll get the full 60 frames per second running on what I think is the best port of Afterburner for a home console. So there you go. We took a little journey from the NES all the way to the Sega Saturn. You can see how quickly you can switch between those cores. And what's really fun on a CRT television is that you can see and hear the kerplunk as each core loads in and the circuits rebuild themselves inside of that FPGA chip. Now, I just realized after the fact that I did miss one port of Afterburner, which is this one from the PC Engine in Japan. Actually, a very nice port, given the hardware limitations there. But there you go, a nice little tour of Afterburner. Now, as far as more complex systems are concerned, the Nintendo 64 runs great on the MiSTer, especially when you're hooked up to an analog television. We can also load up the PlayStation 1 on here, too. So you're looking kind of at the mid-90s back insofar as what this can support. One thing, though, about the MiSTer is that it doesn't have as much support for some of the advanced emulation features that we've grown accustomed to. So not many of the cores have save states, for example. You don't have rewind or fast forward. It really is an experience that is more closely in tune with the original hardware. As such, I tend to play games that don't really benefit from a save state, some more of the arcadey type of titles. Most of the cores support the built-in saves that those games supported. So, for example, PlayStation memory cards or the onboard memory on a Nintendo cartridge are all working. But save states and some of the more modern accoutrements you might be looking for, you won't find on the MiSTer. You can also run the actual arcade games. They've got an extensive list of arcade games that are supported on this hardware. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for example, runs amazing on this, and it's so fun to have that game on my home television, playing in a way that it should be played on an original tube television. We also have other games like some of Capcom's classics, Street Fighter II, Forgotten Worlds. It goes on and on. There's just a lot here, and there's a pretty long list of arcade games that I can show you are supported here that just keeps getting added to over time by the community. And again, it's amazing just how accurate all this stuff is. And when I was a kid, all I wanted was the ability to play these games exactly like they were in the arcade at home. There was always a compromise when you brought one of these home ports down, even with a Super Nintendo or a Sega Genesis. It just never lined up with how it really played in the arcade. But now, for many games that were available back in the day, you can do that here on the MiSTer. And again, every couple of weeks, there's new games getting added to the mix by the community. Now, the only downside to playing arcade games on a CRT television with the MiSTer is that if you have a game that runs in Tate mode, like Zach's on here, you have to physically turn your TV on its side to play the game properly because it won't rotate the image. But on an HDMI display, it will properly rotate things, and you can actually rotate it back into Tate mode, or Tate mode, as my friend from GameSack likes to say. And what's really fun for people that like to capture game footage is that it will output over the HDMI and the RGB analog simultaneously. So you can play on an original CRT, but record and stream off of a digital signal coming out of the HDMI. That said, the HDMI input lag is very minimal. There's very little processing going on. I like to plug my controllers in directly, but even when I have my wireless controllers going in, it all works great. And again, very, very accurate to the original, even if you play on a modern display. But this is also great for retro computing. So for example, I've got a PC running here with a 486 core. It's called AO486. I can go ahead here and run Windows 3.1 if I wanted to. And as you can see, everything is popping up very quickly here. We're at an 800 by 600 resolution. I can also jump out of here, go over to the core menu here. Maybe we could select a Commodore 64 now, and boom, you've got a Commodore 64 popped up here on screen. This will also work very nicely off of the CRT. I could then switch to the rival computer of the time here, the Apple II, and here I've got an Apple IIe now booting up as well. So you can jump from one thing to the other here very, very quickly and jump to something else just as quickly. Here's an Atari ST. I don't think I've got it configured right now, but you could really go through and explore a lot of the hardware that you didn't have as a kid. And for me, I was an Apple II kid. A lot of my friends had Commodore 64s. I've been having a blast going through some of the old Commodore 64 games that I used to play at their house, but never at the length that I wanted to. And now I can explore some new areas of retro technology that I didn't have the opportunity to before. But what about controllers? Well, you've got a lot of options on the controller side of things because the MiSTer takes USB devices. So I've got this 8BitDo SN30 Pro that, in full disclosure, 8BitDo sent to the channel free of charge. That is plugged into the MiSTer right now via a hard wire, but I could also plug in a USB Bluetooth dongle and use it wirelessly. Some of the other 8BitDo controllers I have their own 2.4 gigahertz dongles, so those will work just fine. And of course, the best option, in my opinion, is to run a USB cable for the lowest amount of lag to plug in directly. But you've got some other options on the controller front. I've got a bunch of these other 8BitDo controllers. Some of these I bought, some of these came in free of charge. And these all have the button layouts for specific systems. So for example, if you're playing some older Sega games and you want that 6-button layout that was on the Genesis, and I think the Saturn had a similar arrangement, you've got their M30 for that. We can do some Neo Geo here with the Neo Geo controller. These are very close to the way the TurboGrafx controllers felt and the PC Engine, so you can find a controller that has the right feel to it to best get your muscle memory re-engaged from all of those old games. Now, another option you have on the MiSTer is to use something called a snack, which is what I have here in my hand. Now, this looks like a USB device because it has a USB connector, but it actually plugs into a special port on the analog board on the MiSTer, which is part of the MiSTer stack, where this user I/O port is. And what this little connector's got on board here is an HDMI plug, although it's not for video. So what you can do is go out and buy these little adapters here. MiSTer Add-on sells these. And this one, for example, is a Saturn connector. So you plug this into here, you plug that into your MiSTer, and then you can connect up your original Saturn controller. In my bag of tricks down here, I've got my original NES controller here, and I can plug that in with another adapter here that is designed for the NES. And when you use the snack connector, you're using the original controller with zero lag whatsoever because it's not connecting over USB. It's basically wiring itself in directly to the core. They now have some other snack devices that allow plugging in more than one controller. So you have that as an option too. So there's all sorts of fun ways to get things connected. And on an analog CRT television, the snack on many cores will support the original light guns. So I'm able to play NES light gun games on that old TV upstairs using the snack with the zapper connected to this device. Really cool stuff and a lot of fun on that original TV. Now, if you wanted to interface your original controllers over USB, you can do that with this device called Reflex. And this is from MiSTer Add-ons. And in full disclosure, he sent me this free of charge for this video and perhaps a few others I might be working on. And what's cool about this is that you can use those snack connectors to hook up your original controllers, but now you can interface them with USB through the Reflex. And what's also cool is that it's got a little display on board here. It might be hard to see, but you can run an input test on it, as you can see here, without having to boot up any software. So you can get a very quick idea as to the health of your controller. And they have a mode button here so you can jump between different systems so you can get everything paired up correctly. And one of the things that MiSTer Add-ons prides himself on is reducing input lag. So he's put together some USB hardware that is very, very low lag. So you can use your original controllers over USB with a very fast polling USB interface here. So this is a handy little device, even if you are using the snack, if you want to take some of those controllers and use them on your PC. One note, though, is that it doesn't work with light guns, so only regular controllers work with the Reflex, whereas the light guns work over snack. This also, by the way, will work on your PC and your Steam Deck, and that's a good segue into how I'm using the Steam Deck for some of my other retro emulation. Now, I love my Steam Deck because it's allowed me to get through a lot of the PC games that have been sitting in my Steam library for way too long. As many of you know, I've got 2 kids and a wife. I don't have the luxury of being able to spend a few hours in my gaming room all the time. But I do have moments where I'm sitting around for a few minutes waiting for the kids to finish their homework or putting kids to bed or whatever that the handheld really works well for. And I am just loving having my Steam Deck here. And I do a lot of emulation on the Steam Deck thanks to Emudeck. And you can go to emudeck.com. It's a free utility that you can install on your Steam Deck that gets you up and running with all of your emulators really quickly. And the Steam Deck is powerful enough that it can do everything from the Nintendo Switch on backwards. So the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, and then everything else before that. And because Emudeck is using existing emulators, you get all the benefits of RetroArch, for example, with save states and fast forwards and rewinds, and being able to run some of the higher end emulators for PS2 and other systems as well. And I'll show you some games on it in a minute. So definitely check out Emudeck if you haven't already. It also keeps everything up to date. It configures everything for the Steam Deck, so you don't have to think about anything other than just getting the game onto the device, and you can go from there. Let me show you how I'm using it. Now, one of the cool things about Emudeck is that you can integrate your ROMs directly into the Steam interface. And one of the things that doesn't run on the MiSTer at the moment, because there's no core, is the 3DO. But the 3DO runs fine on the Steam Deck through Emudeck and RetroArch. So if I go over here to Road Rash and hit the button here, what this will do is automatically summon the emulator and start playing the game. And I'll talk about what that retro achievements thing there in a second means as well. And so I can play my 3DO games here with just a push of a button without having to navigate interfaces or find the ROM or anything else like that. We are right into the 3DO and we can start playing. And I found the 3DO emulation to be spot on. It looks great on the screen here. And then I can jump out very easily, as you saw there, and play something else. And here's another one, Burnout Revenge, which I've been replaying on the PlayStation 2 emulator. And so now we can hop into a PS2 emulator. You'll maybe see it poke in a little bit there, but once it gets going, it goes full screen, and we are dropped right into the game. It does support, of course, PlayStation 2 memory cards virtually, which are stored on my SD card here on the bottom of the system. There are ways to sync those over the cloud, so you could even have it running on multiple computers if you wanted to. So there's a lot to this. And again, it's just nice having something boot up on the handheld very quickly without a lot of fuss. And I can put my favorite games into the Steam interface while having more on the backstage here. So here is Burnout Revenge running on my Steam Deck. As you can see, it looks great, it plays great, the frame rate is perfect, the graphics look great on the screen here, and I have yet to find a PlayStation 2 game that doesn't run well on here. Now, I mentioned a backstage function that allows you to keep some more of your games available but off of the main Steam interface. For that, I use Emulation Station, which installs itself automatically with your Emudeck install. And so when I jump into here, I've got a very nice interface for navigating all the different systems that I have installed on my Steam Deck. So I've got some Dreamcast stuff here. So if I wanted to load up Sonic Adventure, I can do that. And it just takes a second here to summon the emulator and pull the game up for us. But there you go. We are logged in and we're playing Sonic Adventure on my Steam Deck. And then I can hit my two buttons here and back out. I can go over to something a little more modern perhaps. Why don't we continue our Afterburner journey and load up Afterburner Climax, which was an Afterburner game that was available in the arcade and also showed up on the Xbox Live Arcade store on the 360. That game, of course, is no longer available because they shut the whole store down, but I've got it archived here. I did buy the game back in the day. I liked it a lot. I don't like it as much as the original, but it looks spectacular, and it runs great here on the Steam Deck. So let me let it load up here, and we'll go through it. I think it's arcade perfect, and I can go to arcade here, select my aircraft. We'll do the Super Tomcat just to jump into the game quickly, and you're pretty much good to go. Now this one will tax the Steam Deck a little harder. I have found that on the older games like the PS2 on backwards that you get a good amount of playtime, certainly much more than you get out of a PC title, just because these games don't tax the Steam Deck hardware all that much. But look how great this game is running. And you can play it, you just got to get your controller mapping figured out, but it looks spectacular, it runs at a perfect frame rate, and this is an Xbox 360 game. So there's some really fun stuff you can do here with your Steam Deck just in handheld mode. And because these SD cards now can hold so much, you can store a lot of games on board in addition to your PC games as well. So just an endless array of entertainment on this box. But I'm not done yet because there is another thing that I do with my Steam Deck to bring the games to my larger television. Now the Steam Deck, of course, comes with a full-service USB Type-C port that can also output video in addition to bringing power in. And if you have a docking station like this one that came in free of charge from Gullah Kit recently, you can get a lot more functionality out of your Steam Deck on a larger display. So if you look on the back of the docking station here, we have ourselves a docking cable that connects to the top of the Steam Deck, power pass-through, HDMI out, 3 USB-A ports for attaching controllers and other devices, and a gigabit Ethernet so you can hardwire your network to it if you don't want to rely on Wi-Fi. And then what you do here is just put your Steam Deck in there like so and attach up the cable there, and your Steam Deck will soon transfer its display over to your main television here. Sometimes it takes it a second to click in. It's not as seamless as the Nintendo Switch is, so let me troubleshoot what's going on with this and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. All right, so I got it all hooked up now to my display here running at 1080p, and I can jump into the 3DO, for example, and we can play some Wing Commander 3, and it will launch the game on the TV just like it was when I was in handheld mode. Note that Emudeck will likely have your games configured for a 720p resolution. I believe you can go back into their interface and bump that up if you're going to be using a television more than the handheld. But for me, it all works fine here. Most of these games didn't have great resolution to begin with, and I'm primarily playing on the handheld more than I am on the television. But it's nice that every once in a while, if I have some friends over or something, we can hook this thing up to the TV, pick up our save game where we last left off, and continue onward, complete with some awesome 1994 games starring Mark Hamill as we're going about our gameplay here. So all in, good stuff. Now, you probably saw a minute or two ago that Retro Achievements thing pop up again. What's that all about? Let me show you. Now, Retro Achievements is exactly what it sounds like. It brings modern achievements to retro video games on supported emulators. One of the nice things about Emudeck is that it manages the login for you. So if you put your credentials for Retro Achievements into your Emudeck configuration, every emulator that Emudeck supports that supports Retro Achievements will log you in, and you can track your progress. Now, just like on the Xbox and PlayStation platforms and Steam, you can choose to share the last 5 games that you played with your friends. You can compare progress with your friends on different games that you're playing. You get a cumulative score based on the achievements that you're getting inside of the games here. And if I click over to Afterburner 2, which is the game I currently have open on my Steam Deck, you can see what those achievements are. So I've done 3 of them so far, and I still have a ways to go here to get more. And you will see Retro Achievements in the interface here. So right now I am playing the game here. I've got my Vulcan cannon going. I just shot a plane down. You'll see in the corner here that number is accumulating, and it's looking for 150 shoot downs with the Vulcan cannon. And if I can achieve that in a single game, I will get an achievement for taking down planes with the Vulcan cannon. So in some ways, you can have a lot of fun with this, not only in the social aspects of it, but also finding some new life for some older games. Maybe you want to try that challenge to shoot down planes only with the Vulcan cannon to get that 150 achievement going. So there's a lot of fun ways to breathe some new life into your games, compare notes with your friends. And again, what's nice about this is that once I boot the game up, because I've got everything logged into Emudeck here, it all just happens automatically in the background here. So lots of fun for supported games. Not every game has a list of achievements available for it. The way this works is it actually ties into the emulator and looks at values in memory to determine whether or not you hit that achievement yet or not. There are some controls to prevent continues from interacting with certain achievements. It'll vary by the game and what it tracks. So in many cases, you want to be honest with yourself and not try to cheat your way to the top here. But there are people out there looking for cheaters. So if you do mess around too much, you'll probably get called out and removed. So keep it honest, and I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. But it's really neat, and it's developed quite nicely over the last couple of years. And I'm just getting into it, but it's really fun now to have a profile on there and get rewarded for playing some of my older games. So definitely give me a follow on there, and we'll see how we stack up. Now, unfortunately, the MiSTer does not support retro achievements. It only works on PC-based emulators. It would be great, though, if it did, because I'd love to get achievements while playing on my old analog TV upstairs. So that is how I am retroing at the moment, using one of these 2 devices. What I love is just how easy these things are to get working. There's a script that you can run on the MiSTer called Update All that takes care of all the updates and configurations. On the Steam Deck, of course, Emudeck does that for me as well. So I spend much more time playing games now than I spend tweaking the emulators and the settings and everything else. I just get in and play for the few minutes that I have available and get out, and everything gets kept up to date for me. So if you're looking for that ease of use and you have a Steam Deck, I think Emudeck is definitely the way to go. On the MiSTer side, it's getting a lot easier to get yourself a MiSTer. The parts are more available now. And thanks to Tacky Udon, and I'll put a link in the video description, there's now a clone board of the FPGA portion of the MiSTer project that is available through Tacky's site. And you can put one of these MiSTers now together for, I think, around $150 or $160 all in, including all the accessory items that you need to get it up and running. So there's a lot of fun developments in the emulation community. If you have a PC and you just want to use that, I looked at an awesome utility a few weeks ago called RetroBat, and I'll put a link to that in the video description as well. That gives you a very similar interface to what we just experienced on the Steam Deck, but it runs on the PC. You've also got Batocera, which is a whole Linux distribution that boots into an emulation station as well. So there's just so many options now. It has never been easier to get into retro gaming or back into retro gaming. And hopefully this video gave you a few ideas to do just that. And I would love to hear some thoughts from you about what I should cover next, or maybe things that I should be implementing in my retro setup here. That can be done in the comments section. That'll do it for this one. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.